These letters are part of the most mysterious language of the ancient world. Nobody can read or understand them. The women of the people who used it wore few clothes, but much jewelry. They regarded animals like this bull with veneration. Their religion involved the worship of a god who is usually shown seated like this, with his right hand on his knee and an elaborate hairstyle. The people who practiced this religion lived some 4,000 years ago in this extraordinary brick metropolis, the city of Mohenjo-Daro. Mohenjo-Daro itself stands 2 or 3 miles today from the river Indus, that line which you can see just below the horizon running into the distance. The Indus is one of the great rivers of the world. It's the backbone of West Pakistan as it curves and meanders 1,000 miles from the Himalayas to the Arabian Sea. The civilization that produced Mohenjo-Daro is called the Indus Valley Civilization. It spread over a much larger area than the civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt of the same period. Mohenjo-Daro was one of the 2 greatest cities of this little-known civilization of the ancient East, and it is the subject of this program. Mohenjo-Daro was discovered as recently as 1922. It's not every day that a new civilization is brought to light with great cities and elaborate organization of civic life and well-developed knowledge of writing. So the event was an exciting one. The ancient civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia have been known for a long time. Now, here was a 3rd great civilization, almost as old, covering 1,000 miles of the subcontinent of India. Research has shown that it lasted from before 2500 BC to something like 1500 BC. About 100 sites have now been discovered. Most of these sites are villages, but there's also the city of Harappa, which is about the same huge size as Mohenjo-Daro, though there's not so much of it to be seen today. The origins of this civilization, like much else about it, are a mystery. Let us approach the city of Mohenjo-Daro and see for ourselves what we can make of it, with the help of archaeology and a little reasonable imagination. The first point about Mohenjo-Daro is its great size. These are only some of the sections that have been cleared amongst the tamarisk scrub and red desert sand. Perhaps 1/12 of it has been revealed by excavation, but that is enough to show how vast it is, 3 or 4 miles round. Entering by a main street, we are at once struck by its width and straightness. Then we have no difficulty in telling what sort of vehicle once used it. The ox cart of today has scarcely changed from its 4,000-year-old predecessor, whose shape is known to us from this terracotta model. A number of these models have been found at Mohenjo-Daro of slightly different types. They were probably children's toys. Turning at right angles into another street, we get a feeling of law and order from the guard rooms still used by the modern watchmen, which stand at the junctions of roads and lanes. This is confirmed by the symmetrical layout of Mohenjo-Daro as seen from the air. It's also shown in this checkerboard plan, drilled and regimented by a civic architect whose word was law. This is in sharp contrast to the contemporary city of in Mesopotamia. The irregular meanderings of the main street of are a very different story. Returning to Mohenjo-Daro, we leave the main streets and turn into one of the side lanes. Here the high blank walls with few doors and fewer windows emphasize the uniformity of the street architecture. No decoration now breaks the monotony, and this absence of individuality is something that we'll notice everywhere in the city, although, of course, there may at one time have been a certain amount of carved woodwork. The walls, as preserved, are made almost exclusively of baked brick in the so-called English bond, that's to say, alternate rows of headers and stretchers with mud mortar in between. Upper stories were probably built of timber. Such windows as there were probably had gratings in them like this. And if it all seems very monotonous now, at least the varied decorations of the household pottery can perhaps give us an idea of how the carpenter and painter may have relieved the original brickwork with their designs. Finally, down a dog-leg turn in a lane which helped to break the force of the prevailing wind, we come to a well-preserved and typical house. Immediately inside the door, a cage protects a piece of the original mud plaster, which probably normally covered most interior walls. Next, inside the entrance, is a small court, with a porter's lodge facing the doorway. From there, a passage leads to the central courtyard of the house, but we stop on the way to visit a bathroom with a well in it. Wells, like this better preserved one in another house, baths and cleanliness were a feature of the inhabitants' lives. Returning to our house, we come next to the main courtyard, round which the life of the house would revolve. Off it were the various rooms for sleeping, eating, and cooking. Finally, in one corner is a brick staircase which leads to a now vanished upper story, probably, as I said, largely built of wood. But now what about the people who once trod these stairs? We can discover a certain amount from the pieces of statuary that have been found, like this portrait bust. This shows it was fashionable to shave the upper lip. The beard is clearly shown, while the upper lip is bare. This is confirmed by the discovery of a rather battered bronze razor now in the Karachi Museum. Another point is that men took some trouble over their closely cropped wavy hair, which was done up into a bun at the back. This is not such an impressive portrait, but with his neat beard and the twinkle in his eye, he strongly reminds me of an old professor friend of mine. The women, too, went in for elaborate jewelry and headdresses. These figures aren't portraits in the same way as the male head, but they do show that the women of Mohenjo-Daro made up in jewelry what they lacked in clothes. Here a Pakistani girl, with the help of a bronze mirror, which some beauty of Mohenjo-Daro once used some 4,000 years ago, is showing us some of their jewelry which was found in the excavations. These necklaces were mainly made of semi-precious stones like carnelian and jasper, and some would not look at all unfashionable today. This one, with its 3 gold pendants in the center, is particularly attractive. Bangles, both of bronze and gold, were obviously popular too. And notice the girdle particularly. It's made of long tubes of red carnelian and is the image of the one worn by some of the terracotta models. Other evidence we have of the lady's interest in makeup is this pot of black eyeshadow and the bronze sticks that were once used to put it on. They also had nail cutters. And combs. And on a more homely note, needles and buttons. Another familiar domestic object they had was a baby's feeding bottle. You must forgive me if I don't handle it quite as it should be. For the older children, there was this charming animal, which still works quite well today. Then there were marbles, and gamesmen like these. They were used for some sort of game, like chess or draughts. For grown-up children, there was that old pastime dice. After which, if you were bored, you could always say, "Bring on the dancing girls." The dancing girl on the right is in fact one of the most remarkable finds from Mohenjo-daro. She hasn't got many clothes on, but she carries all her wealth on her left arm. And with her saucy look and easy posture, she really is a charmer. Less obtrusive members of the household were the pets. Was this a cage for a pet bird? It may have been. But there's no doubt what made these footmarks on a wet brick. A dog, perhaps this very one whose owner had obviously taken pride in his handsome collar. Now, so much for the contents of our house. But there's one other point about the arrangements of the now vanished upper story I must make. In other houses, there exist the remains of an upstairs lavatory, a convenience that is not often found even 2,000 years later in Pompeii. In another house you can see surviving a good example of the carefully built chutes by which waste was drained into the covered brick drains of the main street. There's one on the left. The brick path is modern. The drains of Mohenjo-daro were thus far in advance of those in many towns today. These drains led to brick-built manholes, with a number of drains leading into them. These were cleared by municipal sanitary squads, who in some cases left an adjacent heap of debris for modern rediscovery. Turning off the main street, our next call is at a building which seems to have been a shop. This still has the resting places in the floor where the pots holding the shopkeeper's goods used to be put. The shop fronts on the street, and this one was near a crossroads too, so no doubt it had a flourishing trade. The kilns or furnaces where the pots were made used to be outside the city, but in the later stages they were built in amongst the buildings, like this one. That's its outline with the entrance here.